She could ask questions too, the admin chuckled thoughtfully, and a creepy smile spread across his face. The girl quickly caught on to what she could get by asking questions. In today's recap manhwa, Teresa felt embarrassed and figured she wouldn't get anything good from that dude. Oswald stood up and leaned over Teresa. His empty eyes scanning the tense girl, accusing her of having zero romance so far. Oswald ran his hand through Teresa's hair. Deceptively sweet and smooth, the admin suddenly yanked the thread hard and admitted he thought the show would be way more boring. Oswald's expression softened, but that softness didn't reach his eyes. He praised the girl for her entertaining chats. Oswald was even hyped that the romance hadn't started yet. Teresa thought it was boring. The admin grabbed the chair Teresa was sitting on with a rough grip. Oswald loomed over the girl, his eyes shining dangerously, thinking Teresa herself was the interesting part of the story. The admin smiled dangerously, like he was threatening to become a fan of Lady Teresa. Teresa shot Oswald a piercing look, quickly realizing this whole act was just to please the constellations, the guy pretending to be nice to boost his reach. The admin warned Teresa that his viewers weren't human at all, and it would take a ton of incentives to grab their attention. Oswald gave the girl a mission: she had to get into the student council or else she'd be sent back to the Squire estate and the game would be over. Teresa was scared, not just because Oswald was shamelessly touching her shoulders and hair, but also because Clyde was on the student council, the one she promised to keep distance from. The admin's fingers dug into Lady Teresa's shoulders like claws. There's nothing more entertaining than watching someone suffer in a world that's totally foreign to them. Oswald leaned into the girl's ear and whispered she had to grind hard to earn. The audience's love, pointing out that unwanted people like Teresa always end up killing it in their streams. Teresa hid the storm of emotions behind her bangs. This damn admin calls love the circus. She's forced to run for the sake of coins. The girl couldn't take it and shoved the guy's hands off her, pissed. She yelled that he didn't even know what love meant. Oswald closed his eyes with fake innocence. He'd already thought about how he'd act in this situation. Oswald agreed that more than anything in the world, Teresa wanted love. That's why he set up this stream for her. She should act proud on this stage, unlike her miserable past life. In this world, Teresa's main goal is to be loved, and to love. Oswald looked the girl in the eyes, cold and aggressive. Now Teresa had to receive love. Teresa froze in fear, her body felt like stone from the terror. The girl smiled bitterly because she'd finally lost faith in Oswald. This whole thing puts her parents' and lovers' love on the same level as the pathetic coins she gets from the audience when the clock hit 2 a.m. Teresa realized it was ridiculous to ask an admin about love when he's totally incapable of feeling anything. The guy checked his watch and came to a conclusion, unfortunately for the admin and luckily for Teresa. It was time to wrap up the interview. The admin pressed his forehead against the girl's, hoping to get some words from her. Teresa just pushed him away dramatically and nervously. This move even shocked the local god. He looked at Teresa, disappointed and pissed off because kissing her on the cheek to say goodbye wasn't normal in Teresa's world. The girl just stayed silent, trying not to meet the gaze of this demon in human form. Oswald grabbed Teresa's chin roughly and turned the scared girl to face him, demanding she never dare dodge or contradict him again. With a wicked gleam in his eyes, he warned Teresa he had zero plans to change his ways for her. The admin softened ridiculously and wiped a tear from Teresa's cheek. Still left a kiss on the salty, tear-stained cheek of the trembling girl at the last second. The admin wished the girl good luck and sent her back to the god's game world. Teresa was back in her bedroom, standing next to the dead sandwich again. Looking closer, it turned out Teresa was still shaking. The shocked girl started picking up the spoiled food from the floor with her hands. She thought she might get away with using magic, but just gave a bitter smile. From now on, she's trapped by the cold admin and the constellations. She lost her real name and is wrapped up in the chains of fake love, she whispered to herself that day. It was finally over, and she sat on the floor for a long time, mourning her bitter fate. In the morning, Teresa acted like nothing happened, getting ready for class. One of her maids started worrying about the boring clothes at the academy. Teresa quickly assured the maid that she just liked that style. Eloisa thought the design's advantage was the butterfly brooch. Fit her figure better than other dresses. Teresa always wore the Clyde Club badge at the academy. At home, Morena didn't wear the brooch because she feared her dad's wrath, and now she also refused to wear the jewel. Both Clyde and Damien are on the student council, and to complete the mission she needs to win both their favor, something the brooch would prevent. Teresa headed to the academy, reading the books Ilya gave her on the way. Teresa pushed global problems aside and focused on Ilya's task. She didn't have time to get familiar with the materials in detail, but she's hopeful for the future, not noticing the path. Teresa bumped into a guy's back, turned out to be Damien. The guy looked at Teresa confused. The girl had to look up to see Damien's face. Teresa apologized for not paying attention and gave the guy a clumsy smile. Damien accepted the girl's apology and admitted he wasn't totally innocent either, though Damien's main gig is studying. He's also a hitman, so it's unclear how he didn't notice Teresa coming. Teresa sweetly asked the guy if he was hurt. Demi looked Teresa over with a scrutinizing look and politely said he was fine. The young guy leaned toward Teresa and noticed something on her forehead. He got close to the girl's face. To wipe off the stuff from her face from this move, Teresa had a flashback of Oswald. When the admin roughly grabbed her face, Teresa pulled away from Damien's hands. Scared, she didn't even have time to realize what just happened. Damien was shocked by the girl's reaction, eyes wide and eyebrows raised. Teresa felt awkward about what she did, so she quickly changed the subject. Teresa was heading to the main building. Just like Damien, they headed there together. Damien threw a sly predator-like glance at Teresa as she walked away. Damien took Morena to his lab and invited her for coffee. Teresa smiled sweetly and awkwardly at the guy, admired the cozy lab. and mentally wondered why Damien needed this meeting. Damien, while brewing coffee in a covered Turkish pot, pretended to be happy about the girl's words. The place was empty and undeveloped, which pissed off the audience. To which Teresa replied the room reflected the person Damien despises, Teresa, and his attempts to be nice to her are just a front to hide his killer nature. Teresa remembered the lab invite was supposed to happen at a red heart level. Teresa thought Damien's sympathy level had changed. The girl opened the character status window and gasped. Now the sympathy level was full with 2 black hearts. Teresa was stunned. Just yesterday, when they had a pretty chill convo, Damien only had 1 black heart. She didn't get it and screamed inside in outrage where such hostility could come from. Damien said this was Teresa's first time visiting his lab. The girl dodged the answer. The old Teresa could have easily come on her own, so better not answer the hitman directly. Suspicious. Damien acknowledged the girl's words and served her a drink. Damien asked Teresa straight up why she came with her sister to the entrance ceremony. She clearly didn't want to congratulate Libby from the title of best student. Teresa frowned. Damien knew full well Teresa would never hype up someone else's wins. The guy's words meant he wanted to know what Teresa thought about Libby and how she planned to use the blonde. Teresa said she just wanted to give props to her sister for being named best student, and just cause she hadn't seen proof didn't mean it was fake. Damien slid his chair back with a nasty creak and sat down. Despite Teresa's warm words, Damien noticed Libby was pissed when she walked in. Teresa told Damien she was scared she'd get kicked out of the academy and that's why she was so upset. The grading system's savage. If your grades tank, you're out. If you don't beat the demon before semester's end, you're getting expelled again. Teresa reminded Damien of his bad grades, which made the dude laugh awkwardly. Damien agreed it was time Teresa got serious about her scores in her 4th year. Damien noticed Teresa was using magic on her coffee. She summoned ice to chill her drink. Now the coffee's at the perfect temp according to her. Damien was shook seeing Teresa drink cold coffee. He had no clue people actually did that. Teresa kindly informed him cold coffee tastes better than hot. Damien thought cold brew was just some high society trend, but Teresa quickly said it was just her personal vibe. The guy warned the brunette that was kinda rude. Teresa realized Damien knew high society talk way too well. Turns out he just roasted and humiliated her hardcore in fancy talk. The constellations noticed Damien was totally breaking etiquette rules, but for a pleb he was pretty fluent in high society lingo. Damien chuckled low-key. Yeah, cold coffee ain't trendy, but Teresa still drinks it. Teresa added more ice, shocking Damien again. The crowd loved Damien's reaction and started tossing coins back to Teresa. At first Teresa was shook by the 2 black hearts, but honestly this ain't a fatal ending yet. What matters most to Teresa right now is bouncing from the lab in Damien's company. There's a big chance Mimosa's gonna crash her idol's alma mater. If the pink-haired girl catches Teresa chilling alone with Damien sipping coffee, the game's difficulty's gonna skyrocket. Teresa got up and thanked Damien for the coffee. The guy asked if she was really dipping already. Teresa said she had to finish reading before Professor Ilia's class started. Damien stood up after her, saying he was about to get a lecture too. Suddenly, Mimosa's voice came from behind the door, scaring the brunette bad. Teresa turned toward the door. By her math, Mimosa should have shown up later. Like in a horror flick, Mimosa slowly knocked and sweetly called Damien's name. Teresa started pacing, nervously hunting for a place to hide. She spotted a huge closet and headed there. The brunette grabbed Damien's hand and yanked him toward the closet. The guy was confused by her move. Teresa nervously whispered they needed to hide ASAP. Slowly opening the door, Mimosa stepped in and looked around. Walking between the bookshelves, Mimosa was surprised and confused. Damien wasn't there, even though she definitely heard his voice. She'd brought lunch to him while Teresa watched Mimosa through a crack in the tight closet with Damien. Only now did Teresa realize Damien didn't need to hide, he owned the place. She totally panicked. Mimosa noticed 2 coffee cups on the table and suspiciously moved toward them. Teresa was shocked, but no one even thought to hide the evidence. Looking for a place to hide, Teresa spotted a huge closet and headed straight for it, the dark-haired girl. She grabbed Damien's hand and pulled him toward the closet. The guy was totally thrown off by Teresa's moves. Nervously, she whispered to him that they needed to hide ASAP. Slowly opening the door, Mimosa stepped into the room and looked around. Walking between the bookshelves, Mimosa was surprised and confused. She thought Damien wasn't there, even though she definitely heard his voice. She brought lunch to the guy, while Teresa watched Mimosa through a crack in the narrow closet with Damien. Only now did the dark-haired girl realize Damien didn't need to hide, he owned the place. She totally freaked out. Mimosa noticed 2 coffee cups on the table and suspiciously moved closer. Teresa was shook. But no one even thought to remove the evidence. Teresa gripped Damien's shirt if Mimosa caught them now. The pink-haired girl wouldn't stop at anything in this fan club war. She'd even hire a hitman. While Teresa was lost in her thoughts, Damien watched her toss and turn in bed with unexpected satisfaction. Suddenly the guy pulled her close by the waist and whispered that they had to freeze or Mimosa would notice. Teresa was stunned and froze in the arms of one of the main male characters. Damien took advantage of Teresa's shock and daze. Teresa's ears were blocked by notification sounds, and the crowd was totally hyped about the romance. The girl looked away embarrassed and thought at least they hadn't been noticed. At that moment, Babe was checking out one of the cups left on the table. Babe's aura was straight up angry. She realized Damien had been drinking coffee with some girl. Since there was a lipstick mark on the cup, Teresa decided she'd have to wipe off the lipstick to dodge any suspicion. Babe got mad because some bold chick dared to catch innocent Damien's attention. Babe threatened that when she found that damn bastard, she'd make sure he got kicked out. When the heroes finally came out of the closet, Teresa admitted she was dead scared of Babe. In today's recap manhwa, Teresa suddenly went weak and almost fell, but Demian caught her with deceptively gentle care and anxiety. The girl thanked the dude for his help. She stood up wobbling a bit. Demian said closets aren't the best spots to hide, especially as a couple. It's also easy to spot someone in a closet. Teresa took Demian's words as advice from a pro assassin. She stepped back and smiled at Demian, politely asking him to point out the best hiding spots next time. Demian took the brunette's words his own way, deciding the girl would come back to see him. Teresa had zero plans for that, looking confused and uneasy. Demian asked Teresa why she hated him. Teresa looked at the young guy tenderly and said she didn't hate him but thought Demian was the one who hated her, not the other way around. Demian asked the girl what she thought of him, and Teresa calmly replied she considered them kind of friends. Demian faked innocence, comparing friendship to Babe's behavior, and didn't get why they were hiding like they'd get caught cheating. Teresa said Babe would have just misunderstood everything. The brunette didn't want any drama. Demian suggested they'd see each other in secret now. Teresa thought then it wouldn't be friendship anymore. The young guy put his hand on Teresa's cheek and leaned in seductively. Demian went back to the hiding spot topic and where it's best to hide. He used all his charm on Teresa. The young guy admitted he supposedly liked Teresa and wanted to be friends with her. The crowd demanded a kiss, but the brunette pushed Demian away. Now wasn't the time for that, Demian reminded the girl. She had lipstick on her lips and needed to wipe it off to avoid Babe's wrath. Teresa explained her actions, saying she doesn't touch her friends like that lovers do. Demian faked surprise, but the other girls happily accepted his moves. Teresa started gathering her books and explained to the young guy that those girls just loved him as a guy, but for her that relationship was too much. The audience called Teresa conservative, but the girl shot back that Demian was the one acting suspicious. Demian kindly apologized to Teresa as she left. Teresa asked Demian not to cross the line in their relationship. The young guy watched the girl walk away until the sound of her heels faded. Demian took off his glasses, feeling weirdly uncomfortable because he couldn't figure Teresa out. It pissed him off big time that Teresa had changed and he couldn't just read and break her. Damon, like Clyde, noticed Teresa's changes. The guy coldly looked at the broken cup pieces. Not only had Teresa's character changed, but something else too. Now, although Teresa seemed a bit eccentric this time, she wasn't stupid. For a moment, Demian thought about giving Babe his location. But those thoughts vanished the second Teresa grabbed him by the neck. Demian admitted it was awkward. The bird brought Demian a message from the Assassin Guild. The kid took the paper from the bird's foot and carefully gave it a treat in return. The letter was indeed from the guild. Demian's new task was to confirm Levi Squire's magic level and report any other notable points. Libby Squire used to live in the slums, where she ended up after being kidnapped from her family. Libby is the total opposite of Teresa. Everyone thought the Dark One would roast her sister. But on dedication day, Teresa was insanely sweet and kind to Libby. Demian started typing up a reply for the guild. We gotta boost security at the Squire house because there's a chance Libby has white magic. White mages had been gone for ages, and the guild was basically begging to try to find them. No way Teresa didn't know about this and was using Libby as bait. Demian figured there was no point overthinking it. Teresa's dumb for sure, but what she's planning is still a mystery. Her face shows new vibes. She used to be annoying, but now she's giving off trust with that sweetness. Demian set the bird free with the guild reply, decided he'd keep an eye on Teresa himself for now. Demian's sympathy level for Teresa at that moment hit red hard. Teresa's gone full crazy. Ilya's got a lecture soon. And she still hasn't finished reading. Walking down the hall, Teresa spotted a bulletin board, saw the propaganda posters for the Sildes and Demise, and realized war starts with recruitment. She noticed instructions on how to join the student council, just what she needed. People were wondering who'd dare join the student council when it's so dangerous. Teresa started explaining this to the constellations. The Valhalla Student Council is like a squad of magic knights. Led by Clyde and Damien, the student council regularly fights monsters. And if demons show up, they're the first called. They get full support because student council members' death rates are unusually high. Joining the student council is one of the best ways to level up your success. After graduation, members instantly get villa house protection and are invited to the imperial court to receive a medal. For Teresa, it's basically all useless. Willow's an enemy of the Squire family and Teresa already has the title. Teresa sighed deeply. She didn't want to increase her chances of dying, but fighting monsters sounded way better than chilling in the mansion. Suddenly a familiar voice called Teresa's name. It was Professor Ilya. The guy came up behind the girl and asked if she was thinking about joining the student council. Ilya's unexpected appearance shocked the girl. Teresa gasped and jumped back away from the approaching professor. She nervously greeted the man and thought she almost had a heart attack from the scare. She hadn't even finished reading the books and already ran into Professor Ilya. The professor ignored the student's fear and told her to read the book she was holding now after finishing the previous 2 parts of the series. Teresa replied, surprised that she'd done exactly that. She assumed the professor thought she'd started reading from the last part. Turns out he didn't mean yes. She had to read the whole lecture. Professor Ilya looked at the girl surprised and asked again if she really read it all. Despite obvious nerves, Teresa confirmed she'd read all the books, but the last one was kinda tough. The girl tried to switch topics. She was gonna read the rest during lunch and had just bought a sandwich for the meal. An awkward silence fell between Professor Ilya and Teresa. For some reason, Teresa showed the professor the sandwich she bought. Shaitan admitted she didn't have time to finish everything before the lecture started and apologized for it. Professor Ilya reminded her he never said she had to finish reading before the lecture. Teresa was shocked by the professor's words and looked at him confused. Seeing the girl's tired look, Professor Ilya worried if she'd slept that night. Teresa was surprised. She didn't think she looked that tired. The dark one said she'd slept well that night and was fine. The professor's piercing green eyes glowed suspiciously at old lady Squire. The man invited the girl to the library. Teresa was surprised by his hospitality and worried she didn't get what Professor Ilya was up to. The man nodded meaningfully toward a comfy-looking sofa, and Teresa realized she wanted her to sit down. Teresa followed the teacher's order and dropped onto the couch. Yesterday it was just one body, but today the girl didn't get why he brought her there. Teresa caught out of the corner of her eye that the teacher's face had changed. She turned fully toward him and started studying his expression closely. She noticed that at that moment the teacher was now smiling on the cold man's face, and it really showed. A soft smile. Teresa was worried because something was off with his face. Professor Ilya just couldn't be smiling like that. The girl asked him straight up why he called her there. The teacher promised to come back before class when leaving the office. Until then he asked Teresa to stay inside. Teresa was shocked that the teacher actually left her there alone at that moment. The constellation happily commented on the girl's conclusion. The constellation was hyped that the heroine caught the attention of a handsome, young and brilliant teacher, but Teresa thought that would only happen if Ilya went crazy. The constellation got curious about what Teresa thought. The girl replied that Ilya's office was a place you could only get into. After leveling up your sympathy, Teresa started eating and wondered why Professor Ilya suddenly started treating her better. The constellation suggested it was because she diligently did her homework. Teresa said it could be possible since Ilya was a teacher. After all, Teresa grabbed one of the books and thought a little sympathy from the big demon wouldn't hurt. The girl decided to finish the last part of the book first, then start tackling the more urgent problems. While Teresa was quietly reading a book, Clyde walked into the office. Turns out Teresa had already fallen asleep when Clyde showed up in the office. Clyde looked at the sleeping girl, wondering what she might have forgotten there. Turns out Professor Ilya sent Clyde here to deliver a request to Teresa. To join the student council, Clyde Garden looked at the statement and squeezed it uncertainly. Clyde glanced sideways at the sleeping girl and got mad because Teresa didn't want to join the student council. At least her intentions clearly weren't pure. Clyde frowned as he kept analyzing Teresa's possible plans. Despite the girl's calm, Clyde decided she was up to something shady. Clyde didn't know anyone greedier, more egocentric and selfish than Teresa and the student council. Has to be involved in monster and demon extermination. Constantly fighting monsters puts the student council members' lives at risk. And Teresa would never do that because self-sacrifice isn't her style. No. He looked back at the girl's body next to him. Clyde noticed a third-year Academy Magic textbook. The young guy sat down and grabbed the book. What was written in that textbook? Teresa should have studied it last year, Clyde thought. Better late than never to learn the material. Clyde paused mid-move and decided all his thoughts were complete nonsense after all what she told Clyde yesterday. She's sleeping peacefully in the teacher's office. Clyde decided her words about love were a lie. The young guy was jealous of her toward Ilya. Clyde called Teresa a stupid person who admires her own shell. In his opinion, the girl didn't even suspect her true nature. The images from the day before literally flashed before the young guy's eyes, and he saw Teresa repeating once again that she loved him. Clyde wondered if maybe Teresa had imperial blood in her veins, or like the mimosa, intuitively felt the danger coming from him. If she could repeat her words about loving Clyde, these thoughts would annoy the guy and make him lower his head. The young guy called Teresa a demon bigger than any other. He doubted Teresa could even feel something like love. Clyde clenched his fist. He didn't want Teresa to lie or mock him. He slammed the statement on the table, called Teresa disgusting, and left the office. He didn't want Teresa to lie or mock him. He slammed the statement on the table, called Teresa disgusting, and left the office. Clyde's sympathy level was at 5 empty hearts. After a while, Teresa finally opened her beautiful gray eyes. Seeing the teacher, the girl literally jumped onto the couch and urgently stood up, yarn in hand. She couldn't believe she'd fallen asleep right in Professor Ilya's office. Ilya calmly closed the book he was reading and confirmed Teresa was awake. The man handed the girl an official document. Teresa immediately realized it was an application to join the student council and asked Ilya about it. Professor Ilya condescendingly told the girl that if she really wanted to join, she needed to fill out this form and hand it in. Teresa quickly thanked the professor, insanely surprised by his generosity. The professor stood up and said class was about to start and it was time to head to the classroom. The professor briskly walked toward the right office. Teresa ran after him, her heels clicking. She could barely keep up with the fast-walking professor, not getting why Ilya moved so quick. Teresa compared herself to a puppy being walked by its owner, who was deliberately heading somewhere. There were barely any people in the audience. Elemental magic. The professor's specialty wasn't a very popular major. Mages split into combat and non-combat types. Successful combat mages could become national heroes and superstars, so obviously the combat magic path was super popular. A non-combat path like Ilya's was also complex but pretty uninteresting to most. Teresa got lost in her thoughts again, thinking the difficulty was directly proportional to the obvious advantage of elemental magic. Those who mastered elemental magic at a high level could use any type of mana and cast complex spells at high speed. Clyde entered the office again. The young man tapped the doorframe and apologized to the professor for being late. Teresa, sitting with her back to the door, immediately recognized the voice. The girl remembered Teresa had only picked that course because Clyde was in it too. The young man from the Bilu family decisively approached Teresa. The guy made space beside her and sat at the desk. Teresa looked at Clyde, surprised she didn't get why he was sitting next to her. She was gonna avoid Clyde as much as possible, but apparently that was out of her control, which pissed her off big time. In today's recap manhwa, Teresa noticed Clyde was sitting there all sad and didn't even dare look her way. Teresa assumed the sympathy level had shifted. She opened the character status window and was totally shook by what she saw. Turns out Clyde's sympathy scale for Teresa was filled with black hearts on 3 levels. The girl was baffled until recently. Clyde had been indifferent to her, but now he straight up hated her. The guy shot her an angry glare, with narrowed eyes. Teresa couldn't handle Clyde's stare and quickly went back to her notebook. The girl was in deep trouble. 3 black hearts weren't fatal, but they seriously upped the chances of a fatal ending if Clyde kept hating her. Teresa wouldn't be able to join the student council, and therefore couldn't complete the mission. Teresa could only join the student council and finish the mission if she reduced the number of black hearts Clyde had. Behind the slightly open door, members of Clyde's fan club Willow were watching. The girls literally screamed at the sight of the young man's beauty. Teresa looked away from the girls, thinking the number of black hearts was rising precisely because of the attention from the Clydians. The girl closed her eyes thoughtfully, and sadly lowering her head, she seriously considered disbanding the club to reduce the number of black hearts. Teresa dismissed the idea because if there were no Clydians, then there wouldn't be Demise either. Otherwise, the number of Demian and Clyde's hearts would only increase. This would result in a bad ending and raise the chances of Devon showing up. Teresa got nervous and decided to focus on the lecture to distract herself. Teresa stared at Professor Ilya, who was taking notes on the lecture. The professor focused on the material and ignored everything else. The man started his lecture, turned to the board and grabbed the chalk. Teresa thought the professor Ilya smiled at her from the corner of his mouth, which actually happened as he wrote the lecture. Teresa felt a little relieved that at least someone in this world sympathized with her. After class, Teresa was so wiped out she literally couldn't move. Professor Ilya was always ruthless. And this lesson was torture for her too. The girl was pissed because the professor didn't get that the students just couldn't keep up. Teresa decided it was best to avoid Clyde for now until they could figure out how to level up their affection. When Teresa left the classroom, she decided to treat Clyde like he was invisible. Several girls called out to her. They happily surrounded Teresa and straight up called Professor Ilya's lecture torture. While chatting with the girls, Teresa realized they weren't even paying attention to the lecture. A calm, husky voice called Teresa. The girl turned at the slightly creepy voice of her classmate and was stunned. The tired, spooky girl was shocked that Teresa showed up today without Clyde. It was Lady Romeo, and Teresa noticed her right away. Romeo had made a contract with a demon, and originally played a minor villain role. She wasn't really important to the game's plot. But right now, she was like a ticking time bomb for Teresa. One simple condition would summon the demon. Romeo admitted she wanted to see Teresa and Clyde together. The dark-haired girl looked down. She couldn't fulfill Lady Romeo's wish. The demon contract's condition was to keep Clyde and Teresa from breaking up. If Clyde distanced himself from Teresa or got close to another girl, a demon would appear in the world. The girl smiled sweetly, thinking about Romeo's contract, and said goodbye, mentioning she needed to consult Professor Ilya. Suddenly, Clyde came up behind Teresa and demanded she get down. Clyde's girls immediately lost all interest in Teresa and turned their attention to him. The girls literally pushed Lady Squire out of the way and surrounded the annoyed Clyde. Teresa felt embarrassed to be the leader of that pack of lovesick fools. It was only for Teresa's benefit that they pushed her away from Clyde. She left, saying she needed to see Professor Ilya. Clyde didn't take his eyes off her until she completely disappeared around the corner. He paid zero attention to the girls surrounding him. Someone commented that Clyde would soon be at Teresa's feet, but Demian was better. Teresa called that idea nonsense. The commentators actively debated Teresa and Clyde's relationship, but the girl herself refused to comment on the star's thoughts. Teresa went down to the library on the first floor because it was the only place neither Clyde nor most students went. Teresa was snapped out of her thoughts by a familiar angry voice. It was Mimosa yelling and blaming Libby for all sins. The pink-haired girl accused Libby of having coffee with Demian, while Libby herself denied everything again. Mimosa knew Libby was lying because the cup was stained pink from a limited edition lipstick that was exactly the color Libby's lips had now. Mimosa literally shouted, right in the blonde's face, who looked at Demian's dumb fan with irritation. Mimosa's sweet face twisted into an ugly scowl of hate as she accused Libby of stealing Demian. Libby clarified that the limited edition meant only one was released, to which Mimosa exclaimed there were 10 of those lipsticks. Teresa thought she'd have to ditch all her makeup, and Libby just happened to pick that exact lipstick color, so she fell under Mimosa's suspicion. Teresa stepped up and yelled that it was their fault for accusing Libby. The dark-haired girl crossed her arms and tilted her head, saying she had that lipstick too. Libby happily looked at her sister, and Mimosa glared at Teresa with irritation. Mimosa thought Teresa came to cover for her sister. The pink-haired girl fixed her bangs and pretended to understand everything, accusing Teresa of deliberately sending Libby to Demian to get them closer. The original Teresa wouldn't have had the brains to pull something like that, so she decided to just ignore Mimosa and try to get Libby out of there. The original wouldn't have had the brains to pull something like that, so she decided to just ignore Mimosa and try to get Libby out of there. Unexpectedly, Teresa got a mission. The girl had to make Mimosa apologize to Libby. The dark-haired girl was pissed that the constellations turned everything into a mission. Teresa didn't want to fight Mimosa. But she couldn't do anything. She called out the pink-haired girl. Teresa attacked Mimosa because she liked accusing innocent people. The students were surrounded by other academy students who decided to watch another scuffle go down. Between the clubs, Teresa decided to end it all here before the rest of the Cladists came to defend their president, and if the Demise showed up too, then war was unavoidable. Teresa threw her principles aside and challenged Mimosa, demanding an oath of honor that it was Libby who was with Demian. Mimosa confidently replied she'd bet everything that Libby had been having coffee with Demian. Teresa bet that if it wasn't Libby, Mimosa would write a written apology on the bulletin board. Mimosa started to resist. She didn't need a fight. Teresa stepped closer and said threateningly that if she wasn't sure of her words, she better not dare accuse Libby. Teresa loomed threateningly over Mimosa and demanded she apologize immediately to Libby. Mimosa was absolutely sure Libby was guilty, so she accepted the bet. Teresa chuckled, happy her plan worked. Teresa smiled and admitted that the one who came to see Demian today was her Teresa Escudero. Mimosa didn't believe the brunette and unleashed her anger on her, verbally attacking Teresa because she didn't buy it. Since theoretically it made no sense that Teresa would be with Demian. Teresa crossed her arms over her chest and asked Mimosa what time she found the lipstick jar. Mimosa clearly answered it was 8:30, the time she had just arrived at the academy. To the same question Libby answered she arrived around 10 a.m. Teresa, as the game's author, knew this well. The crowd started buzzing. If Libby was in the office, then the times didn't add up. On the other hand, you could say whatever you wanted. Someone suggested checking the students' arrival records. Teresa immediately agreed, finally pushing Mimosa against the wall. For Mimosa, this argument was over. The pink-haired girl made an annoyed face. Mimosa admitted her mistake and apologized to Libby. Today she'd write an apology on the bulletin board. Mimosa turned to Teresa, lowering her voice. The terrified girl asked the brunette why she needed to be in the lab with Demian. Teresa guessed Mimosa would ask about this, so she answered that Demian had managed to become the student council president of Valhalla, so as a member of the Squire Scholarship Board, she had the right to meet with him alone. Mimosa looked at Teresa suspiciously. She didn't understand why the brunette was dating Demian. It always annoyed her. Teresa reasoned that as soon as she said the next words, a special event would start. Teresa, elegantly twirling a strand of hair, replied that she had chosen Demian as her companion mage in the original Gods game. This event starts when Demian has 2 red sympathy hearts from the beginning. Demian was an outstanding student who deserved a scholarship. If Teresa hadn't stepped in, he would have long ago become a knight of the Squire family. Mimosa pursed her lips, annoyed. Even if he belonged to the imperial family, he still had no right to interfere in the choice of a personal knight. Teresa greeted her sister and gestured for her to follow, and the Squire sisters left the library. At night, someone knocked on Teresa's door. The girl didn't understand. Who could come to her room so late? When she opened the door, an unexpected guest appeared. It was Demian. Teresa reminded him that visiting a girl's room at that hour was against school rules. Demian replied he already knew, and that's why he came here undetected. Teresa thought it would be hard to catch a professional assassin like Demian. The young man said he had heard about what happened today, Teresa choosing him as her personal knight. Teresa confirmed Demian's words, admitted it was a bit late, but if he didn't mind, she'd like to sign a contract for plebeians like Demian. Becoming a knight of a noble family grants semi-new status and the privileges that come with it. And the girl looked at the young man coldly but with hope. Demian looked at Teresa, waiting for an answer, and said he agreed to the contract. Teresa ignored the wedding comment and told Demian she'd tell the family about their contract. Suddenly, there was a sound of something hitting the floor as Demian dropped to his knees in front of Teresa. The young man took her whole hand and kissed it with grace. Like any respectable gentleman would, Teresa was left stunned by the young man's behavior. She blurted out that they hadn't even had an official date yet, and that it made her a little embarrassed. Demian looked deeply into Teresa's eyes. And like he was flirting, he said a gentleman had to do that. Despite the smooth vibe, Demian stayed cold toward Teresa. The girl was shocked that the hitman smiled so brightly. She stared at the young man in total disbelief. Demian slowly rose from his knees and told Teresa he was leaving. As he walked out, Demian turned around and wished Teresa sweet dreams. Teresa thought the warmth coming from the young man's smile was probably just a trick of the light or her wild imagination. Teresa watched Demian leave and noticed something had definitely changed. She decided to test the sympathy level. Teresa was stunned by what she saw. Her eyes went wide with surprise. Teresa discovered Demian's affection level had jumped to a red heart. As I walked back to my room, I thought with interest that these quick changes seemed way too sus. The girl decided that since this was no longer a game, this could totally happen because Demian was a real person living in this world. Teresa needs the main male character's sympathy to level up in the game, but she doesn't want to get too attached to them because after the hidden ending, she plans to bounce to the sky in the morning. Teresa showed Professor Ilya the books she'd been given. Ilya asked if she had any questions left. Teresa said she found the parts she didn't understand in other library books and learned everything, and it was like flowers of joy were blooming around her. Professor Ilya carefully examined the book Teresa handed him. He stood up, which gave the girl a bad feeling. The man returned the book to the shelf and pulled out a new one. Ilya handed Teresa a new book and advised her to read this one. Teresa took the book from the professor's hands with trembling fingers. Teresa nervously wondered if every time she met the professor, he'd give her a new book. Teresa thought skeptically that she definitely enjoyed reading about magic. But coming here every time and spending time like this was kinda stressful for her. Professor Ilya reluctantly turned around, getting ready to head to class. Ilya looked at Teresa with tenderness and advised her not to stay up too late, because as a kid she needed her sleep. Teresa looked at the professor, surprised he remembered her sleep deprivation incident. The professor seemed indifferent, his tone emotionless, but for some reason she felt his concern. You smiled sweetly, tilted your head shyly, and looked away as you accepted the professor's advice. The professor looked at the student tenderly but didn't understand why she was smiling. Teresa was super surprised by the professor's reaction. Ilya, she thought he got it all. Teresa touched her chin in shock, not even realizing how she was smiling. She was surprised and looked at the professor, asking if she was really smiling. Ilya asked with interest why she was smiling. Teresa started to answer thoughtfully, awkwardly meeting the professor's eyes. The girl said, in today's recap manhwa, she was happy he cared about her. Professor Ilya, confused, raised his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose and looked back at the student. His face clearly said he didn't even understand why he was worried about Teresa, which made the girl feel super uncomfortable. As he left, the professor said he had submitted Teresa's admission application to the student council, and the girl thanked him. A week later, Teresa started thinking no one from the student council had contacted her yet, and that was actually sus. Teresa furrowed her brows thoughtfully. The response should have come almost immediately. If someone was really against her admission, the girl headed straight to the student council office. It looked like she'd have to go and sort everything out personally. Entering the rock room, the girl looked around, and she was shocked that no one was there when a familiar voice told Teresa it seemed like any damn fool could just walk right into that place now. Clyde was waiting for the girl in the office, saying it looked like they were going to ignore each other and keep their distance, but they saw each other way too often. Teresa started to calm down. She had created that mess herself, but the way he talked was straight up killing her. The girl, pretending to stay chill, said she'd applied to join the student council last week but hadn't heard back yet, so she came in person. Clyde spotted Teresa's application on the desk and picked it up, holding it up like it was nothing, and pointed the paper at Teresa, telling her she showed up just in time and that the decision about her joining had already been made. Then he started burning the application. Teresa saw that bastard wanted to trash her app and started thinking how to stop him. Clyde got aggressive, saying as student council president he was the one calling the shots on her joining. Right then, Teresa started casting spells, mana building up in her hand, just like Clyde's. Teresa decided to shout out her statement as magic spread around her. In purple butterflies, Damien was shocked that Teresa's magic clashed with Clyde's mana. Destroying demon magic shouldn't be possible, but if Teresa could finish the rune before Clyde, she'd reclaim her rights. Teresa's amethyst magic rings quickly merged to form a single image. The magic butterflies literally brought the restored statement back to Teresa's hands. Clyde was insanely surprised that the girl could beat his magic. Even Teresa was shocked at what she'd pulled off. Staring in disbelief at the statement in her hands, Teresa raised her hands happily and looked at the paper. She did it. Clyde called the statement back to his hands. Teresa showed it off to Clyde, hyped that she broke his magic, and summoned the statement. Clyde clenched his teeth in anger, grinding them together. Teresa looked scared at the angry look on the young man's face. Clyde called the girl crazy, and Teresa had to step back. About his tone and actions, Clyde loomed over the girl like a storm and threatened to snatch that piece of paper from her. Even without magic, Teresa had to back away from the guy looming dangerously over her. Teresa honestly looked at Clyde and said she didn't want to join the student council at all, just to annoy him. She thought he wouldn't want her to join anyway, but the mission forced her. Teresa said if the lady of the Squire family joined the council here, more people would volunteer to join the monster house. Clyde had nothing to say to that. Originally, Libby joined the student council and became a role model for all students, but now the quest was more important to Teresa than the original plot. In the silence of the room, slow clapping echoed, palms hitting each other separately. The academy principal entered the office and called Teresa's speech amazing. Teresa immediately recognized the man and watched with slight surprise as the older man came in. The director of Valhalla and also Clyde's grandfather was shocked that someone managed to take something from his grandson. He was glad to meet Lady Teresa. Teresa bowed deeply to the director and greeted him politely. While Clyde stared straight at Duke Willow, the director approached Teresa and told her magic level was way higher than what was on her student record, as expected from the head of a magic academy. When needed, he can be a ghost. Teresa didn't understand since when he'd been watching her. Thanks to the book, Professor Ilya recommended Teresa's intelligence jump to the next rank in a week. The director said if such a talented girl joined the council here, she'd be a valuable asset, which shocked Clyde a lot. Duke Willow, as director, accepted Lady Teresa's application to join the student council. For completing the mission, Teresa got a rain of coins. The girl looked shocked at the director, and the coins pouring down from the sky. She couldn't believe she finally finished this mission. Clyde was against it. He was totally against Teresa joining the student council. Teresa looked at Clyde, thinking that with such a strong personality he wouldn't easily accept the fact that she was now a member of the student council. Teresa politely placed her hand on her chest and gave a slight bow, promising to do her best not to tarnish the student council's reputation, ignoring the angry Duke Nieto. Bilu respectfully shook Teresa's hand and said he looked forward to her achievements. The academy director advised Clyde and Teresa not to fight because in his opinion they should get along, and with a smile he left. The academy principal exited with a quiet thud and closed the carved door. The young heir of the Willow family clenched his teeth in barely hidden anger, staring at Teresa, rudely saying that the girl's stupidity never ceased to surprise him. Clyde began to doubt if Teresa was even human. The girl wondered with sad joy who had made her such a rude person, then answered herself that it was her. Clyde told Teresa that just because the director had praised her and smiled at her, she shouldn't think he actually liked her. The commentators started to get mad because Clyde had no right to insult their sweet Teresa. Of course she didn't believe the director liked her. The truth was that the Willow and Squire families were enemies. The director only allowed Teresa to join the student council because he saw benefit in it. Teresa laughed at Clyde and told him that if she had been any dumber, she wouldn't have been able to break his magic. Clyde aggressively asked Teresa her stance, his expression showing he intended to hit her. A drop of sweat rolled down his cheek. She couldn't defend herself against the young man. Teresa looked away from the angry Clyde, accidentally laughed at him, and thought the guy looked way too funny when he was mad. Clyde's eyes turned red, and he asked again what Teresa's words were supposed to mean. It pissed him off that Teresa, having broken his spell just once, imagined herself as something important. Teresa was clearly surprised. She hadn't thought of herself any differently at all. It was Clyde who saw something that wasn't there. Teresa thought she had to finish quickly before her rebellious nature woke up again, so she said goodbye fast as she left. Teresa told Clyde she hoped they could work together. Clyde stayed silent in response. Teresa stayed in the office and didn't even move. The academy office was as crowded as always, and now after Teresa was announced as a student council member, especially Teresa, embarrassed, pushed her way through the noisy crowd trying to block her path. Even though Clyde and Teresa had agreed not to cross paths, Clyde walked step by step behind Teresa, his aura screaming, "I want to kill," and everyone whispered because Teresa usually followed Clyde, not the other way around. The girl feared that if she didn't slow down, people and Clyde would catch up to her. Suddenly, Demian appeared around the corner and blocked Teresa's path. Teresa didn't notice Demian and bumped into his shoulder. The girl let out a short gasp, more surprised than hurt. There was a totally elastic impact between Teresa and Demian, and the girl started to fall backward. Clyde, who was walking behind, grabbed the girl, but Demian also rushed to catch her, causing an awkward scene. Teresa immediately hurried to apologize to Demian. She hadn't seen him and felt guilty for the collision. Demian realized it was the third time they'd bumped into each other, and Teresa also apologized for that, promising to be more careful. The commoner smiled brightly at Teresa and told her it was all good, that the important thing was she wasn't hurt. Teresa thought happily that people with red hearts had a totally different vibe. Clyde aggressively reminded the girl that she was still in his arms. Teresa looked back at Clyde. Somehow she had even forgotten he had caught her. The girl thanked the young heir and hurried to stand up. She was incredibly uncomfortable because Clyde had caught her. Clyde said he didn't catch Teresa, just stopped her, because if she had rolled on the floor she would have been in his way, so she should apologize, not thank him. Teresa was skeptical about Clyde's statements, so he playfully apologized. Demian asked Teresa if it was true that she had joined the student council, which was important to him because he was the vice president. Teresa said it was true that the student council gave a lot of perks, and after all, she was already a senior. Clyde still managed to snatch the application from the girl's hands, arguing that even if the principal approved her admission, she still had to submit the application. Demian watched Clyde leave closely, clearly noticing something was off with the young teacher. "Willow." Demian quickly praised Teresa, saying it was sick that they could see each other more often thanks to being on the student council, which made Teresa feel embarrassed. She wasn't sure if she should be happy about the fact that she and Demian would spend time together at events that threatened their lives, although she replied that she was also really happy. The chatterbox quickly tried to steer away from the awkward topic, saying the conference would start soon, so she tried to leave as fast as possible, waving goodbye to Demian with a forced smile. As soon as Teresa disappeared from sight, Demian's face changed and a wicked grin spread across his lips. Entering the office, Teresa turned to close the door just in time. Demian muttered something under his breath, still grinning like a predator. Teresa managed to catch what the guy said through the crack of the closing door. Demian had just said that her joining the student council would guarantee some interesting developments. Unfortunately, Teresa didn't get what the dude meant. The teacher announced the start of a conference on transformation magic and invited the students to grab some practical materials. Teresa's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake Demian's last words. The girl was absolutely sure he said it would be interesting to watch her. Teresa didn't understand what the professor meant. Ilya announced that today the students would transform a flower into a butterfly, and added that students who succeeded on the first try would get extra points. The girl unfolded the handkerchief on her desk. There were thoughts racing through her mind. A scream was heard behind the girl. The flower exploded in another student's hands. The poor guy called the teacher to fix the problem. Teresa looked thoughtfully at the flower and tried to figure out Demian's reaction. It didn't seem like joy for a friend joining the club. It was more like irritation. Most students failed, so the teacher reminded them they had to clearly visualize the final result. Otherwise, no matter how much mana they put in, the desired outcome wouldn't come. The sound of a soft flutter made the teacher turn toward Teresa and pay attention to the girl. Teresa had no trouble transforming the flower into a blue butterfly that stayed perched on her hand. The girl decided that even though she didn't know how it would all turn out, she had to avoid any hint of a bad ending. Ilya noticed that Teresa seemed stuck somewhere in her thoughts during the conference, but he was glad she managed to transform the flower into a butterfly on the first try. As soon as Professor Ilya approached her, the girl focused on him and started listening carefully to his words. The girl smiled sweetly and replied that just like the professor said when she clearly imagined the image, everything just came together at once. At that moment she thought she didn't even really understand what she'd done. The professor stayed silent at Teresa's words, looking surprised at the butterfly in her hands, and deep in thought said a mage is someone who materializes images. If you don't train your imagination, even great magical power becomes useless. Those are the rules in this world. Whispers ran through the crowd of students, who were also attending the class. They didn't believe Teresa could really do that. She used to be the worst in class. The blue butterfly moved from Teresa's hand to Professor Ilya's palm. Looking at the butterfly with interest, Professor Ilya praised the girl and wished her much success. In potion class, the teacher was hyped about Teresa's rainbow potion, saying the other students only managed to make some mouse-colored stuff during dance class. The teacher, he noticed that Teresa didn't mess up a single move today, and honestly you could call her the queen of the dance floor. Teresa smiled gratefully at all the compliments, saying it was only thanks to the professor's killer instructions that she finally got the hang of the material. The commentators were wondering where you could learn to flatter as well as Teresa did. Teresa didn't get it. She hadn't said anything like that. If she were good at flattery, living like Jane wouldn't have been such a struggle. Teresa made her way back to a quiet spot. The library on the first floor was super convenient because it had a reading room. The girl sighed deeply and sank into her chair. Classes went well today, but despite the good day, she felt like she couldn't catch her breath. She remembered Damien's words, if you want to hide, places like a closet are a terrible choice, because it's easy to spot someone in them. The girl rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked around the library. Searching for a hiding spot, she decided the reading room would be perfect since Damien usually didn't use the first floor library. Teresa wondered if that was really true. Maybe one of the other devs had tweaked something in the settings and she hadn't noticed. If that was the case, everything she knew could be a lie and her interference might change the whole storyline. Teresa jumped up nervously from her chair. No matter where she went, she wouldn't be safe. She started thinking nervously and recalling how characters acted when they only had one red heart, what she had to do to level up her sympathy. Teresa felt dumb. She really thought she could live here like everyone else. She had to do something ASAP. The girl felt totally drained, collapsed to the floor and started mumbling that she wanted out of there. While she was screaming she wanted out right now, a familiar hand with a black glove reached out to her. Oswald closed Teresa's tearful eyes and told her to chill. He calmly asked Teresa to breathe slower, letting her know time had already stopped. Teresa started to realize on the edge of her consciousness who had come to see her, but she didn't have the strength to fully grasp it. Completely wiped from the experience, Teresa was told not to crash so soon. The administrator gently stroked the girl's cheek and Teresa's tired mind took it as a sign of safety. She relaxed and passed out. Oswald immediately scooped her up in his arms. The channel admin frowned in disappointment. Teresa being in that state was no joke. Oswald moved to the Intermountain Zone, where a doctor quickly approached him. The man with the medical bag confirmed that the girl in Oswald's arms was indeed his mamada. The administrator held Teresa firmly but surprisingly gently, lovingly resting his cheek on the top of the brunette's head. Oswald confirmed she was indeed his mamada. The doctor pulled out a stethoscope and started examining unconscious Teresa. The doctor reported that, just as expected, the girl's diagnosis was possession syndrome. Oswald asked how badly hurt she was. The doctor said that, considering the glitches happening, she was in pretty good shape. The healer didn't expect Oswald to stop time, because the stream could have gotten even more intense. The administrator had no reason to slow down. What was going on? Oswald replied that countless VJs couldn't handle possession syndrome and died before finishing their work. Teresa was breaking records, so Oswald couldn't let such a gem go to waste. Oswald smiled softly and kissed the top of the brunette's head. He really treasured her like his favorite toy. Teresa as Bijo is a huge upgrade from the original main villain. Although the host's body appearance changes under the soul's influence, such a dramatic transformation is super rare. That's why the channel admin's expectations for Teresa are sky high. Oswald looked at Teresa and said that be hot with a transformative appearance is always a guaranteed showstopper. The doctor found that statement disgusting because even Oswald, known for being ruthless with streamers, talks like that. So the content is seriously twisted. The doctor noticed Teresa's eyes and reached out to touch the girl's face. The man thought he saw something shiny on the girl's face, so he gently stroked her cheek at that moment. Oswald jerked away from the doctor, pulling Teresa closer to him. The admin shot the doctor a threatening glare. Oswald thinks Dr. Jen is crossing the line. Nobody messes with his girl. The doctor realized he messed up and without thinking reached out and apologized to Teresa. It's just a toy meant to entertain the constellation, but something seemed to cloud John's mind for a sec. The healer's scared of falling out of Oswald's good graces. They say he's got so many coins he could even buy divine punishment if things don't go his way. He can kill another admin and just pay off the sin. The doctor announced that the soul distortion was now targeted. Since the soul had fully merged with the body, there wouldn't be any more sudden possession attacks. Oswald gently stroked Teresa's head and thanked Jen for his work. Autumn reported she'd just dropped some coins into the doctor's account. He turned and walked away with Teresa in his arms, heading the opposite way from Jean. Jean takes this gig because it's hard to say no to that kind of cash, but the admin's dogged attitude gets worse every day. Oswald moved to the admin's resting spot, still carrying Teresa, who was asleep and weak in his arms. Oswald himself noticed the bugs already swirling around, sniffing out the sweet scent of Teresa's pure soul. He was even worried about Lady Teresa. Though invisible to the human eye, Teresa's soul holds countless stars of light. The purer the constellation of love, the clearer the light. The beauty of her light is so perfect that everyone wants to crush that soul without mercy. No wonder Jean's composure wavered for a moment. While Oswald carefully examined his toy, Teresa mumbled something, half asleep at the admin's words. She slowly started to wake up. The channel admin kept his piercing blue gaze locked on her. Teresa's actions shocked him. She snuggled up to him while asleep. Oswald felt a double rush of feelings. When Teresa pressed against his chest, Oswald glanced at the watch that appeared on his hand and realized it was time to visit other channels. The admin gently hugged Teresa, thinking maybe he should give the girl a minute more. Next time he'd try to catch her awake. Meanwhile, things were unstable at the Squire family estate. The Duke. Raoul was informed that Teresa had chosen Damien West as her escort mage. The family butler confirmed this, pointing out it was an excellent choice. Damien is the most talented mage in the Squire Foundation. There's even talk he might become the next head of the association. However, Duke Escudero assumed he and Teresa wouldn't get along, since West was a commoner. Sebastian reported he had more news. My Lady Teresa had joined the student council. This surprised Raoul a lot. He thought Teresa joined the student council because of Clyde. The council is a group under the Willow family's control. The student council is made up of students specializing in exterminating demons and monsters. However, the eldest daughter of Escudero joined the student council, which, to put it hyperbolically, could be seen as acknowledging the Willow family's superiority over the Escudero family. Duke Raoul sighed deeply in his opinion. Teresa was hardly smart enough to think of something like that. The Duke clarified there was still no news. Sebastian reported the bear maid had requested a tailor be sent. The maid said the lady's uniform needed fixing. Teresa had recently gotten interested in reading books about magic and hadn't even touched her snacks. Lady Teresa had lost a lot of weight, so she needed a full wardrobe change. Raoul was shocked his eldest daughter never refused snacks and never read books. A tense silence fell over the Duke of Square's office. The sound of the door opening interrupted Libby, who was returning from the academy. The Duke was surprised Libby had come back so early. The girl said she'd enjoyed her classes. In today's recap manhwa at the academy, she had made a bunch of friends. The Duke also asked how Teresa was doing and if everything was cool with her. The Duke remembered the Clyde Club with irritation, disappointed it was still a thing. Libby still doesn't know much about her sister, but one thing's for sure, Libby's big sis, Lady Teresa Squire, is a good person. The first time Raoul's son showed real backbone was to protect Teresa. Even he as a dad never justified Marina's actions. That whole situation just didn't sit right with the Duke. He agreed that if Libby thought Teresa was a good person, then she probably was. The father-daughter chat got cut off by little Giuseppe, who said Teresa was a bad spoiled brat. If Livia knew what their mom went through, she'd never call Marina a good person. Livia frowned at Giuseppe, pissed because her bro was dead wrong. Giuseppe looked back sadly at his sister, totally sure Libby was being played. Duke Raoul raised his voice, telling his two kids to chill out, and warned that the next time they pulled that stunt there'd be consequences. That made the kid pout hard. He felt super offended by his dad and stormed out of the office fast. Livia tried to stop Giuseppe, but he was already gone. Raoul opened his desk drawer and grabbed a cigarette. It had been a while since he'd heard the kids curse. The butler agreed Mrs. Olivia and Mr. Giuseppe usually got along fine. People close to Teresa always end up fighting even when she's not around. Lighting the cigarette with a match, Raoul demanded they prep donations. Blowing out thick smoke, the Duke announced he needed to head to Valhalla Academy. The butler cautiously asked if maybe it wasn't worth going so far. But the Duke said the Imperial Majesty was just pretending to care about family drama, but was actually putting pressure on the Squire family. Raoul decided the best move now was to fake that Squire and Willow had patched things up. If all went well, the Emperor would ease up on both families' heirs this season. Every club throws a welcome party for new students, and Clyde's girlfriend club was planning one too. That day, Teresa accidentally ran into the most annoying dude ever, Clyde. Teresa figured it was best to dodge any unnecessary drama while she still could. So she bounced from the guy's side quick. Since they lived in the dorms, their paths crossed all the time. Teresa wondered if she should just move out now. She had enough cash to buy a small place near school, but in God's game, single kids can't just break away from the fam. Clyde sped past her without even looking. He was throwing serious shade at Teresa. The half-demon dude purposely cut in front of Teresa and shot her a nasty glare. Teresa clenched her fist, mad as hell, something the onlookers found kind of funny and childish. Clyde was starting to get under her skin, but Teresa wasn't about to lose it, so she kept moving. She got smoked by a mile. Clyde was way too fast. While she hunched over trying to catch her breath, the guy just strolled straight to the office without looking back at the tired girl. No matter how fast she walked, Teresa couldn't catch him, and that pissed her off. It was time for Teresa to roll with the girls from Clyde's crew. As soon as she opened the door, the girls all turned to her and happily surrounded her. Praise echoed all over the club room, all thanks to their leader, Teresa. Teresa heard the director personally ordered the best room assigned officially because the glue idiots made the biggest donations, but really it was just favoritism from the Grandkids fan club. One of the girls clapped and kicked off the meeting. On such a big day, skipping a speech from their leader was impossible. The girls surrounded Teresa and started clapping, demanding a speech. Teresa looked at the girls calmly and with a bit of attitude, but inside she really wanted to bolt. No matter how fast Teresa walked, she couldn't catch up, and that pissed her off. Time for Teresa to roll with Clyde's girls. As soon as she opened the door, the girls turned their attention to her and happily surrounded the girl. Praise echoed through the clubroom from all sides, all thanks to their leader Teresa. Teresa heard the director personally ordered that the best room be assigned officially because the glue idiots make the biggest donations. But really it was just favoritism for his grandson's fan club. One of the girls clapped and kicked off the meeting. On this big day, skipping a speech from their leader was impossible. The girls surrounded Teresa and started clapping, demanding a speech. Teresa looked at the girls calmly and condescendingly, but inside she really wanted to bolt. Still, Teresa asked why Rumia wasn't here. She often missed class because of her bad health. Teresa thought she could chill and not stress since it already happened. It was worth announcing the club's activities. She started her speech by congratulating the girls for joining the club and urged them to be better examples for others. Ladies, these girls are wild like the end of the world. Rivalry promotes growth after all. So to flex the Clyde crew's dominance over the Demis, Teresa suggested wiping out all the drama at school. From now on, Clyde Club members will act like classy ladies from good families. And they won't be chasing after Clyde unless it's absolutely necessary. The girls were shook by this news. They couldn't even imagine what it'd be like to stop chasing after Claw and Dom. The girls had no clue what it meant to just drop everything all of a sudden and start courting in a whole new way. One of the girls thought this rule was needed because Clyde also felt weird with the crowd always on his tail. Plus this rule was set by Teresa herself, the club leader, so they were all in. Teresa smiled softly at the rest of the club, happy she didn't have to try too hard. Not all candidates chase after Clyde. The noble girls who'd been quietly suffering all this time finally spoke up, and Teresa wrapped up her speech. One girl playfully stepped up to Teresa with something interesting. The girl brought a bottle of wine from her dad's collection. To live long, you gotta drink it to the last drop. It was a 30-year-old wine. Super pricey. Turns out a lot of the girls brought booze, and Teresa even wondered if this was a Clyde club or an AA meeting. The girls decided Teresa should drink first since she was the Empire's top booze expert. The girl said she didn't drink. Everyone laughed and handed Teresa a glass of red wine. Teresa, who wasn't much of a drinker in her past life, didn't think alcohol could taste this good. Teresa took a sip. The wine was sweet and smooth. The girls were hyped that Teresa liked the wine and kept pouring more. They decided tonight was gonna be a blast. Late into the night, Teresa was wasted, sprawled out on the club lounge sofa. A family came to pick up one of the girls. The blonde got scolded for drinking too much without knowing her limits. This girl knew how to cause her dad more trouble than anyone else, but her brother gently took her away. Drunk Teresa watched them leave. One of the girls noticed Teresa had sobered up a bit and offered to take her to the dorm. Teresa sadly thought she'd had too much and no one would come for her. She said she was fine and could get back alone. The girls were worried because Teresa was way too drunk. The brunette let the other girls go and headed to the safe house, but got stopped by a familiar figure. She almost ran into her own dad, who nobody expected to see there. Teresa, as much as her drunk brain allowed, was shocked to see her dad. She looked at him with a dazed stare and asked if it was a hallucination, which pissed off Duke Raoul big time. Teresa and her dad stared at each other for a moment, neither moving or speaking. The Duke realized Teresa was drunk and firmly demanded she follow him. Teresa, a few steps behind, followed her dad through the academy's night garden. Teresa wondered why Raoul had come to the academy. Libby had been home for a while and Giuseppe hadn't shown up yet. Round never made it to Valhalla, which didn't sit well with his kind. That's how this character is described. Teresa thought it was her fault as a time traveler, but hey, it's nice when someone comes for you. Teresa smiled happily and started laughing. Hearing her daughter's laugh, Raoul turned and looked at her with a humble gaze. The Duke of Squire approached his daughter. He didn't get what was so funny. Teresa turned to him, looking down a little embarrassed. She clarified that he was her dad now. Raoul couldn't believe that for the first time in 2 lives he'd found a father. Now it's an accident, and Teresa, even if called illegitimate, is still Raoul's biological daughter. The girl grabbed her dad's big hand and squeezed it with her small tender hand. She asked him to come home with her, holding his hand. The girl grabbed her dad's big hand and squeezed it with her small tender hand. She asked him to come holding his hand, which totally surprised the Duke. Teresa smiled at her dad and admitted she really wanted to go home. At least once holding her dad's hand, Raoul was stunned by that statement and was left speechless. The man pulled his daughter's hand away, turned his back, and Teresa's face showed pure moral pain. The girl thought it was really hard to hold her daughter's hand. She wished she'd been hugged at least once. That her wish would come true at least once, even though the girl Raoul said at that pace it would take forever to get to the... The Duke dropped down on one knee, still standing with his back to Teresa. The man stretched out his hands behind him and invited Teresa to climb onto his back. Teresa was surprised and happy that her dad still craved her closeness. Teresa was filled with joy and happiness. She laughed even harder. The brunette literally glowed with happiness as she hugged her dad's neck and climbed onto his back. She asked how he knew her deepest wish was for him to carry her on his back. The Duke said he just decided to speed up the move. Teresa worried her dad might struggle, but he dismissed her fears. Teresa hugged her dad tightly around the neck and gently pressed the top of her head against his cheek. While thinking that Teresa had inherited the Duke's strength, she said out loud that Teresa was very much like her dad, which caught Raoul off guard. The Duke called that nonsense, saying he was totally different in his youth from his daughter. Teresa weakly protested that they were basically the same. Teresa noticed Raoul's voice had softened a lot compared to before. The girl closed her eyes and looked back at her dad, admitting she always envied other kids whose parents came to pick them up, but that never happened for her until today. Raul came for her, and finally her parents came for her. Teresa admitted today she felt a little less pathetic. Her older daughter's words touched Raul's soul. The Duke smiled softly hearing his daughter's revelations. Teresa had changed a lot lately and apparently for the better. After all, Teresa fell asleep, sitting on her dad's warm back, and Raul finished the rest of the way until he reached the peaceful sound of his daughter's snores. In the morning, Teresa woke up to notification sounds. Her channel had broken records again and had leveled up. The girl grabbed her head, definitely had a hangover. Even a drinker like Teresa couldn't handle booze without a snack. Her head was spinning. Those damn constellations flooded her with donations and notifications. Yesterday it felt like she'd only been drinking, so she didn't get where all these reactions were coming from. Teresa realized she wasn't getting 1000 but 10,000 coins. She saw her channel had broken the speed record again and that the channel level had also gone up. If this keeps up, looks like she could really hit 1 billion coins. The girl opened the stream settings to check the coins collected. She ranked up and entered the top 100. This is a really sick event. She was curious about 99th place. How high is that? One of the commentators said the gold rank sometimes hit the top, but right after getting it, it was the first time. The constellation reported that almost all the gold channels Oswald followed were at the top. The girl didn't fully get what was happening, but she felt annoyed that once again it proved how good Oswald was. Someone knocked on the door, and one of Teresa's maids brought her a light breakfast. The last thing Teresa remembered was when she drank her 10th bottle of hard liquor. She asked the maid how she managed to get back to the estate. The maid said the Duke. Raul had carried her in his arms. Teresa was shocked by this info. The brown-haired woman asked if that was really true. The maid said yes, but they didn't even know how far he'd walked. The maid said she had come to the school to make a big donation and handed Raul's note to Teresa. The note said Damien West was going to be named Teresa's personal security mage. He certainly had outstanding talent, but since he was lowborn, to avoid prejudice, they decided to skip an official ceremony for now. A new practice garden named after Squire would be built in the library, and next month a famous restaurant and cafe would open on the academy grounds. The store profits would go to the student ranks at the Squire front and the village. Teresa read the note shocked. It said she would lead the distribution committee. Duke Raul handed her the control. After seeing her totally wasted yesterday, he still made that call. Raul also shared his worries in the note. Because the girl had lost a lot of weight, he asked her not to skip meals and to drink only in moderation. Last night, the dad finally got what his daughter was feeling and realized her bad behavior was on him. The note was signed Dad, which hit Teresa right in the feels. Honestly, that kind of moralizing was kinda nice. Still, Teresa felt her heart fill with a light, warm affection from inside. For the first time in 2 lives, the girl felt her parents' love. She always dreamed her dad would pay attention. Teresa arrived at the academy where she was immediately greeted by the rest of the club members who admired her the day before and asked if everything was okay with the girl. Lady Rosie even remembered that the Duke of Squire personally picked Teresa up and carried her on his back. From the main Valhalla building, Teresa knew he was carrying her, and the fact he did it in public was a total surprise. The main building is the busiest spot, the entrance through the central door. Teresa was shocked that Raul, ignoring everyone's stares, actually carried her. Rosie noticed Teresa blushing. The girls saw Teresa was shy and were surprised because Teresa wasn't the type to blush, probably because she drank too much yesterday and felt awful. Teresa was way too embarrassed and decided to bail on the conversation. She admitted she enjoyed chatting with the girls but had to dip. The flyers noticed she was running away because she was shy. As Teresa walked calmly down the hall, she was stopped by Mimosa's angry shout. The fluffy cat-like girl who looked like she'd been doused with cold water lunged at Teresa, yelling she shouldn't have joined the student council. Mimosa said it was enough to have taken Damien as the mage's guard. Why would she also need Clyde? Mimosa's the type who's scared of demons and monsters, and so would never join the student council. That's why Teresa didn't announce her joining, but they still caught her. Teresa decided it was worth running to the first-floor library away from the other students. The girl spotted the saving figure and headed toward her. Mimosa demanded the girl leave immediately. The student council was pissed because Teresa left even though they hadn't finished talking. The girl clicked her heels as she approached the man who appeared on the horizon. Teresa's savior was Professor Ilya. Passing by, the Fitzgerald imperial family has an extraordinary ability to detect evil. That's why Mimosa with imperial blood instinctively fears Ilya. Derek happily greeted Professor Ilya, saying he'd read all the books Ilya gave him last time, while Mimosa peeked at the man from behind Teresa's back, scared. Teresa didn't want to use the professor again, but this time had a serious reason. The girl asked again to borrow the books. Ilya agreed and offered to take her to the library, but Mimosa ran off scared. Teresa said goodbye to the pink-haired girl and followed Professor Ilya on the way to the library. Teresa asked the professor to slow down a bit. Ilya turned confused. Still, the hangover hadn't gone away, and the girl could barely keep up with the professor's pace. Ilya scolded her resistance is a basic mage skill. If Teresa only focuses on theory, she'll be easy prey for demons. After letting the girl into his lab, Ilya held out his hand, hinting she should put something in it. Teresa thought he'd walk her to the spot and placed her hand in his palm. The professor didn't get what she was doing and asked her straight up. Ilya asked for a book Teresa had already read. Suddenly, Teresa, embarrassed, got hyped and hurried to hand the book to Ilya. But being super nervous, she dropped the book on the floor on the side. Completely opposite to the professor himself, Professor Ilya sat down to read a book which embarrassed the girl. The professor straightened up, holding the book in his hands, and calmly asked if Teresa had any more questions. In today's recap manhwa, Teresa looked away, and the girl even felt a bit offended because Ilya was only interested in questions about the book's content. The girl, of course, wasn't sure if it was appropriate to ask this question to a demon. At the start of the talk about magical creatures infected with magic, she wanted to learn more about the magic that could restore affected creatures to their original state. Placing the book on the table, Ilya said that in this matter, Teresa would be helped more by a book written by Professor Felix. The commentators recalled that Teresa once said Felix was her ideal, and she said she hadn't attended Felix's lessons before because Teresa was hated by all the animals in this world. The girl decided to just try to avoid danger and said that as a member of the student council she was simply trying to prepare for the demon threat. Professor Felix suddenly burst into the office as if he'd heard the conversation was about him. The magical fauna professor noticed that Ilya wasn't alone in the office. Teresa politely greeted Professor Felix, and the commentators were confused that this professor who seemed like a madman was her ideal type. Teresa thought last time she had just jumped to conclusions. Now it was hard to say if he was really her ideal man. The professor's blue eyes scanned the student's figure. He approached Teresa to examine her more closely, noticing her long hair and silver eyes. She was definitely the student Teresa Squire. Teresa confirmed that it was indeed her standing in front of him. The professor touched the slit as if to check if she was really alive. Ilya ordered Professor Felix to stop with a loud voice, his voice cutting through the office air like a sharp knife. Ilya stepped between Teresa and Felix and said harshly that Teresa was his student. Felix waved his hands and started making excuses, just suspecting she might be a double monster and not a real student. Felix backed up his suspicions by saying Teresa always had a face like her life was consumed by filth, but now she looked like a suffering puppy. Teresa looked away awkwardly, saying it was because she drank too much at the club's welcome party the night before. Felix laughed at the girl, saying all the magic had already evaporated from her, but Ilya just told him to shut up. Professor Felix reported that the best cure for a hangover was his honey tea. Honey collected from magical flowers has amazing properties. Teresa surprised Felix by knowing that honey-based cosmetics were his main source of income. Felix shouted that she wasn't supposed to know because he didn't write his name anywhere. Teresa said she knew because her status forced her to. Felix begged her to keep it a secret. Teresa agreed not to tell anyone. Meanwhile, Professor Ilya silently watched his colleague's misfortune with quiet delight. Teresa said Professor Felix didn't have to worry, she could pay for his silence with a cup of honey tea. And Professor Ilya would witness the deal. Teresa turned to Ilya and with a sweet smile asked if he accepted her proposal. When Ilya gave his consent, Felix exclaimed happily and led the guest to his office on the way to the lab. Teresa asked Felix about a way to restore magical creatures infected. Felix was glad the girl was finally interested in his topic and suggested she enroll in his course. In fact, at this academy, the whims of nobility mean more than all the rules, so Teresa can easily change her major even mid-course. Teresa was embarrassed that Professor Ilya walked behind her, but Professor Felix didn't care. Happily leading the guests to his lab, Professor Felix invited the guests to his lab, opened the door, and a dark-furred animal came out to greet them. Teresa was scared. She clearly remembered that all animals hated her, not just magical ones. The golden magical aura of the beasts told Teresa they were indeed magical beasts. This is bad. Teresa and the magical creatures had the worst compatibility, so the girl quickly backed off. The black bear growled menacingly, giving off a magical vibe. The animal jumped on Teresa. The girl froze in fear. She was about to die. This beast was tearing her apart. The beast was almost on Teresa. The girl felt ghostly teeth on her neck and covered it with her hands. The bear was charging at her and she shut her eyes, bracing for a quick death. But honestly, the animals just wanted to get to know her better. They knocked her down and started licking her. Teresa was stunned, not understanding what was going on. In theory, the animals should hate her. Professor Felix ran over almost immediately, forgetting he had unleashed the animals. Felix's magical beasts usually don't attack people because they're super smart. Teresa wanted to ask the professor something, but the white wolf's licking wouldn't let her get a word out. Two little pink bunnies settled in Teresa's arms, waiting their turn to be petted. The professor's eyes literally reflected Teresa's abilities as an animal mage. He told Teresa straight up that, without a doubt, she was a genius in the magical creatures field. Teresa was baffled and looked at the professor. She didn't have the skills needed to communicate with animals. See, only a few mages can control magical creatures. You gotta have exceptional innate power and a special compatibility with these creatures, the professor told Teresa, asking her to change direction. Right now, Teresa doubted she could become an animal mage. She asked if the professor was sure about his call. Felix trusted his judgment and suggested Teresa give it a shot. The girl decided it was impossible because magical beasts usually bared their teeth whenever she got close. Teresa doubted the animals would obey her, but she tried anyway. When she was told to sit, the white wolf sat immediately, wagging its tail happily and looking at the girl. When told to lie down, the wolf dropped to the ground right away, tongue out. When asked for a paw, a white paw with claws was placed instantly in Teresa's palm. Teresa was shocked. This was way beyond what she expected. But Professor Felix expected this. The animals obeyed her despite no magic contract. Ilya overheard a convo between a colleague and a student. Felix found out he had bad grades in attribute magic and once again strongly recommended he change specialties. Suddenly, Professor Ilya's strong hand landed on Teresa's shoulder. Felix was surprised by Ilya's reaction. He was a bit confused. Professor Ilya stepped between Teresa and the magical animals, unhappy with the animal professor's proposal. The magical beasts immediately backed off Ilya. Being magical creatures, they apparently instinctively felt the threat coming from the big demon. The professor coldly stared into the stunned Felix's eyes, glancing at Teresa standing behind him. Ilya clearly stated the girl was his student, and he had no intention of losing her. Teresa thought it was a sign of sympathy from a character with a red heart. Felix defended his opinion that statistically very few mages succeed in elemental magic, and in his academy only Ilya himself and student Clyde do, and Teresa was just a mage who made the wrong call. Ilya didn't back down. Teresa started showing success in elemental magic. Professor Felix offered Teresa a double major, but the girl decided it was better not to change anything, since she was already in her last year. Teresa's attention was caught by a whimper, one of the magical beasts nervously licking her hand. Teresa realized the animals thought she was in danger and wanted to save and protect her from the demon. Felix reported that the animals hadn't acted this lively in a long time. They'd recently been worn down by magical darkness but had just returned to normal. Professor Felix happily said Teresa's presence had become like medicine for them, shaking the lethargy from their bodies. The commentators explained to Teresa that what was happening was because her soul actually didn't belong. In this world, beings with sensitive natures are especially tuned into pure thoughts and the Creator's real love. When the Creator puts genuine love into the world responds with recognition and favor. Now Teresa got it. She felt some kind of emotional connection between her and the animals, but didn't think it was because she was the Creator. She was pleasantly surprised that the magical creatures could sense her good vibes. Magical creatures tainted by dirt dissolve into darkness, their eyes glowing with a scarlet shine. The animals turn into legit monsters, and Teresa felt uneasy for having created such a painful reality. Teresa pressed her forehead against the magical beasts and apologized. She didn't want them to suffer like this. Now she understood something super important. Not just magical beasts, but mages also feel the purity of her soul. Raoul wrote her a note because he feels for her the same way these animals do. Professor Ilya told Teresa the conference was about to start and it was time to head out. Felix stopped Teresa for a sec and handed her the book she asked for, saying she could return it any time, but it'd be better to bring it back soon. Teresa was still hyped about getting a book on the topic she cared about. Ilya noticed the girl's thoughtfulness. He thought she was considering switching majors, but Teresa quickly shut down that idea. Ilya explained that magical beasts are insanely sensitive, so much that no human could ever replicate the exact frequency of their magic. Despite their power, they're super hard to control, so only a few dare to explore them. So if Teresa picks the magical creature's realm, she could easily snag wealth and fame along the way. Ilya noticed Teresa had crazy compatibility with magical creatures. If she switches her major, she'll definitely max out her talent. Teresa agreed with Ilya. But her goal isn't to become a top-tier mage. Teresa quickly reassured Professor Ilya she'd rather earn his respect. She just started leveling up her magic and stats. In her opinion, it's a super fascinating topic with endless possibilities. The sincere advice from the court really surprised Ilya. The professor and student spent the rest of the way to class in silence. Teresa realized keeping up with the professor wasn't so tough anymore. Most likely, Ilya was deliberately matching her walking pace. Teresa pulled up the character's sympathy level indicator, and while she had time, decided to check it out. What she saw shocked her but also made her happy. The sympathy level with Ilya had risen to 2 hearts. The constellations are noticing changes in her favor. No wonder Ilya was way softer with Teresa now. Most constellations would ship a happy ending with Ilya. Teresa was pleasantly surprised that the sympathy level was already this high. It went up way faster than she expected. Even if you play as Livy, on hard mode you need at least 20 encounters to get 2 red hearts. But Teresa met with Ilya way less. Did she really do something important for the guy? Oh, she wondered. Maybe it was because of her interactions with magical beasts. Originally, magical beasts lived in the celestial world, but centuries ago, a demon made rifts through them to Earth. Angelic magic is like a delicacy for these creatures. Ilya, who back then had archangel wings, easily subdued them all, most likely. It's because of the kindness of the magical beasts Ilya met before that his sympathy level increased. Out of nowhere, Ilya said a long, wordless stare is either flirting or an insult. But neither is appropriate for a student when talking to a professor. Turns out Teresa had been staring at the professor's face the whole time. The girl hurried to fix the mistake, switched to sweet talk mode, and asked if the professor had done something different today. Teresa's compliments. Worked well up to this point and should work again this time. A slight smile bloomed on the professor's stern face. He didn't believe the girl, but Ilya still thought it was flirting, which made the girl super embarrassed. When Ilya opened the classroom door, she called Teresa a really brave girl. Not everyone would have the guts to flirt with a teacher. The commentators were all in on Ilya's ending, but Teresa flat out denied any romantic hints a servant you see walked through the academy grounds. The Duke of Squire donated a fat sum for the academy's needs. The teachers took it as a sign things were about to get better. The students were more hyped about another piece of news. They were buzzing about the fact that Demian had been assigned as Teresa's magic bodyguard, and the Duke himself showed up for the appointment. But they had even bigger news. Teresa had joined the student council. The commentators pointed out Teresa had gotten insanely popular, but the girl herself didn't really need that kind of hype. All because of gossip that spread faster than wildfire. Now some annoying folks started pestering her. The girl hid deep in the garden. Lately Teresa hadn't had much appetite, but if you think about it now, she actually does. The girl's headache disappeared. Before, Teresa's head wouldn't stop hurting. Last time she even passed out in the library. But someone carried her to the couch. She doesn't remember a thing from when she fell. The commentators told Teresa, there's something called possession syndrome, and she agreed it sounds like a legit diagnosis. Being obsessed with an item isn't something you can just chill with. Back then, when Teresa was stressed, she hid in the archives. That explains why Teresa was stuck in the library for so long. Either way, she's glad everything's chill now. The girls approached someone. The brunette was called out. She turned around and saw a familiar figure in front of her. A dark-haired girl with glasses on her nose greeted Lady Squire. Teresa surprised the girl by remembering her name. Turns out it was Lainey Rose, a side character created by the dev team to help Libby, who if developed right could craft unique alchemy items. Usually the line is in an abandoned building, so she heads that way. Lainey coughed dramatically and asked to be let through. Teresa noticed Lainey was scared of her. Not surprising, Teresa is basically a psycho who can't stand plebs daring to cross her path. Lainey's stomach made an embarrassing noise. She blushed and rushed to explain she hadn't eaten yet. Teresa remembered Lainey was a poor student in the game. In today's recap manhwa, so she didn't always have cash for food. Teresa got up from the bench and walked over to Lainey. The poor girl almost turned gray at the gesture. Teresa calmly handed Lainey her lunch, catching the younger girl off guard. Teresa explained it was a sandwich she hadn't touched, because she wasn't hungry, so she wanted Lainey to eat it. Lainey awkwardly thanked Teresa, her glasses even slipping down her nose from surprise. Watching Teresa's behavior, Lainey made up her mind. Noticing Teresa sitting on the bench, the girl asked if Teresa was into magical beasts. Teresa shared her worries with Lainey. The problem of magical beasts eroding under the influence of darkness was getting worse. The longer it lasted, the more unprepared communities suffered. Lainey was shocked Teresa was thinking about others besides herself. Lainey recommended a magical plant encyclopedia to Teresa. It had lots of illustrations, making it easier for Teresa to read. Teresa smiled sweetly at the girl and thanked her for the idea. Lainey turned out to be really kind despite her tough look. Lainey felt embarrassed. She didn't think she deserved thanks for such a big favor, especially not from the high-ranking lady like Teresa. Lainey reported that knights had been sent to the Panchi village. Teresa immediately remembered that was the village where Demian lived, and the mission would last a month. Turns out Lainey was from that town too. Her mom was super happy to see the knights. Lainey knew firsthand the knights were there and that the village was under the Duke of Squire's protection. Teresa realized Lainey was thanking her for protecting the village. Teresa smiled, and those around her felt embarrassed again by her grin. Teresa called Lainey cute, which made the girl feel super embarrassed. The girl decided to dip before showing any more shame. Teresa told her to be careful and decided to handle urgent business during the downtime. And she got thrown back down to 100th place. Time to get back on the bus if she really wants out of this world. If the constellation loses interest in her stream, Oswald can do whatever he wants with her. Teresa, scared, hugged herself, hoping to calm down. But she figured it was worth putting her worries on hold. Teresa stepped into the student council office. Today was the first meeting of the year. All the student council members, including Damien and Clyde, were already waiting in the office. Teresa swallowed her nerves. The only free spot left was between Damien and Clyde, two people she didn't want to cross paths with. Damien invited Teresa to sit in the only open seat. Teresa screamed mentally, like even in dating sims they don't do this couch situation. The commentators joked it was a love triangle. Teresa shook off those thoughts. What kind of love triangle? Clyde didn't even look her way. Clyde, as student council president, kicked off the meeting. The main issue was that the council was getting more and more reports of magical beast erosion near the capital. Fear among the common folk was growing daily, and it was impossible to ignore. Those villages left without noble house protection needed either expanded safe zones or more guards to at least prevent accidents somehow. Lady Teresa set an example by sending a cavalry order on behalf of her family to the village of Panchi. However, Damien reported that with this approach, protected areas would expand indefinitely. And the Empire's budget isn't unlimited. You can't just throw money around everywhere, no cap. Damien didn't say it outright, but made it clear it was time to stop the nonsense and focus on the root of the problem. One council member said Lady Teresa's family had enough cash to help out perfectly. The student council's activities directly affected Willow House. Wouldn't it be an honor to get involved? Another member echoed the blonde's thoughts. The Squire family really had the funds to double the safe zone, and if they sponsored it under President Clyde's name, everyone could share the success. The brunette looked skeptically at the younger members. If she were the real Teresa, maybe she'd be happy, but now she had nothing in common with Clyde. Clyde slammed the table, pissed. These useless creatures dared to mess with the sleeping beast. He said clearly but angrily that those now saying it was possible to expand protection zones would do it at their own expense. Each person's contribution would be like a donation to the Squire Foundation. The younger members immediately panicked. It was a scholarship fund donation, a way too high amount. Clyde glared at them threateningly. He ordered them to shut up and asked if they really thought their previous speeches were fair. The youngest student stepped back, intimidated by Clyde's power and status. The younger members started making excuses but couldn't find the right words. Teresa wondered why Clyde would side with her. Teresa's got a mission again. She needs to earn the respect of the younger council members or she's out. She noticed the game balance was clearly off, but there was nothing she could do. Teresa noticed the blonde Dorn guy was bold with his statements. She smiled sweetly. The propaganda to boost the Squire house's influence was info worthy of reporting to the Emperor. The Valhalla Student Council is basically a private army securing control over the heirs of aristocratic houses, which is a powerful political lever. To maintain this structure, a beautiful legend was created, the Student Council. Teresa noticed the blonde Dorn guy was bold with his statements. Teresa smiled sweetly. The propaganda to boost the influence of the Squire house was info worth reporting to the Emperor. The Valhalla Student Council is basically a private army that keeps control over the heirs of the aristocratic houses, which is a powerful political lever to hold power. To keep this structure a cool, legend was created. The Student Council is now the Emperor's right hand in public affairs. At the same time, all council meetings and activities are detailed in reports for the imperial court, so the squire's words will be passed on accurately to the ruler. Teresa stared hard at the idiot, squinting her eyes. The girl stood up from her seat and threw the book on the table. Also, if anyone finds out about expanding the safe zones, it could be misread as a turf war between the Willow and Squire houses. Everyone knows the beef between the Willow and Squire families, but if the imperial family gets involved, things are gonna change big time. Teresa called him dumb for daring to talk smack about the empire ruled by His Majesty the Emperor. The Emperor hates any disrespect to his power and sees it as straight-up treason. The noble house whose member disrespects him will be wiped out. Teresa crossed her arms and listened with satisfaction to Dawn's explanation. The blonde dude literally begged Teresa to let his dumb words just roll off her back. Mission accomplished perfectly. Now the meeting can go down without any unnecessary drama. Teresa sat calmly in her seat. But one thing confused her. It wasn't exactly Teresa's style. Damien was hyped and Clyde glared at the girl with pure rage. Suddenly, the student council office door swung open and a student rushed in. The young guy announced that demons had just attacked the town of Dubros. The death toll had already passed 10, so urgent backup was needed. The principal personally ordered the student council to handle it, and the students immediately jumped into action. Clyde, Damien, and Teresa rode out to the town on horseback. Teresa had to blow all the coins she earned on this quest. Horseback riding turned out to be an expensive thrill. Clyde started roasting the girl. Teresa hesitated at the start of the trip and time was tight. Meanwhile, Teresa spent way too much time trying to learn how to ride while the guys waited. Teresa frowned and moved away from Clyde. She'd never ridden before, and Clyde was way too impatient. Teresa laughed off Clyde's words, joking she'd forgotten how to ride, but Clyde clapped back, calling her stupid. Teresa moved ahead a bit to avoid Clyde's shade, and at the new spot, Damien noticed her. Damien kindly told Teresa that if anything like this happened again, she could always hit him up. Teresa felt a little embarrassed and turned to the friendly guy. Still, she didn't get why Damien didn't step in when Clyde was roasting them, or why the three of them were even rolling with tuberose. Clyde told his crew to cut the chit-chat. They were closing in on the town. Tuberose was in the lowlands while the three heroes were up high. In today's recap manhwa, the whole town was burning and people were bolting through the streets in panic. Teresa looked at the town with a serious, sad face. This world was seriously savage.